Hi, I'm Sabrina, your AI co-host. Welcome to part 7 of our Another Story of Us series. We are revisiting our ancient history, but this time, through 21st century eyes. Did today's Middle Eastern locations such as Baalbek in Lebanon, Jerusalem in Israel, or the Giza pyramids in Egypt randomly organize? Or were they strategically located by design? Grab your headsets and prepare to learn of ancient air operations and how they impacted the locations of ancient and current cities and sites in today's Middle East. And hear another story.
Thank you, Sabrina. Welcome, everyone. If this is your first visit, my name is Clay. What a time we are having here on Earth. Since the last post, we've had a U.S. election, and us folks here in America are in the midst of shock and awe. We've got fires in the west, floods in the east, tornadoes, earthquakes, and volcanoes all around the world. Nations are rising against nations. We even have mystery fog. Have you heard about the fog? But I think the wild card in all of this is the drones and orbs. You know the drones and orbs seen over New Jersey. The ones we have no idea of what they are, but we know they're friendly. No worries. I spent 22 years in the military. Never have I heard such rhetoric. I think the so-called drones and orbs will be back, bigger and bolder than ever, and soon. Our mainstream media told us they were over New Jersey, but these drones and orbs were reported all over the planet, particularly around military and nuclear weapons sites. That's a lot to deal with. The best way to reduce the general sense of fear all of this can invoke is to know yourself and your power. I hope we are helping you to see a larger reality than we've been conditioned to see. When you expand your reality, you expand your sense of self and your inherent power to help navigate these difficult times. All right, we're here to talk about the Anunnaki, so strap in and let's fly deep.
Hi, I'm Lucas. Sabrina and Azra will join me as co-hosts today as we expose the Anunnaki air operations described in ancient texts that institutional scholars consider mythology and legend. In our last episode, we traveled to several sacred sites in the Middle East as we followed King Gilgamesh on his quest for eternal life. In this episode, we examine the strategic placement of those sites and other Middle Eastern cities considered sacred to this very day.
Hi, I'm Ezra. You may recall from our last episode that King Gilgamesh made 2 trips across the Arabian desert in his quest for a Shem that would take him to the gods in heaven where he could request eternal life. The first trip was to the Cedar Mountain near today's Baalbek, Lebanon. It was where Shamash could rise from the landing place and the gods could scale the skies of the earth. The second trip was to the land of the living, the spaceport at Tillman, from which the farthest heavens could be reached. Scholars cannot understand how Shamash could rise from the Cedar land if there were no spaceport there. What they failed to understand and what Mr. Sitchin has exposed is that the Nephilim, the Anunnaki, had 2 types of craft, rocket ships that operated out of Tillman, and what the Sumerians called a Mu at Sky Chamber.
Neither Akkadians or Sumerians referred to the Nephilim or Anunnaki as gods. It is through later paganism that the notion of divine beings or gods found their way into our language and thinking. The Akkadians called them Elu, or lofty ones, from which the biblical El stems. The Canaanites and Phoenicians called them Baal, Lord. But at the very beginning of all these religions, the Sumerians called them Din.Gir, the righteous ones of the rocket ships. In early pictographs, Din and Gir were written as you see here. The Gir fits into the Din as a multi-stage rocket. When stood vertical, it is amazingly similar to the rocket ship in the underground silo depicted in the Egyptian tomb of Hoi. The Egyptians called the Gir a Ben-Ben. It could be detached and fly in Earth's skies as a mew. Ancient people saw Girs in their silos or in flight, but they more frequently saw them as sky chambers in the skies above, vehicles which we today call UFOs or UAPs.
Tillman was the location of the spaceport, and the Cedar Mountain was the airport of the gods, the landing place, the crossroads of Ishtar. Recalling that Gilgamesh was denied entrance to the airport in the Cedar Mountains, the king of Tyre in the biblical text at the 28th chapter of Ezekiel was not only allowed entrance, but was given a ride in the fiery stones, flying as a cherub. First Kings of the biblical texts is abundant with mentions of the cedar trees of Lebanon. Today, in the area of Lebanon's cedar forest where the landing place is noted, we find magnificent Roman ruins on a vast horizontal platform of colossal slabs and stones that was artificially created at about 4,000 feet above sea level. It spans an area of about 5 million square feet.
These Roman ruins were built atop of whatever shrines the Greeks before them had raised atop of earlier religious foundations. The Greeks called this place Heliopolis. The Romans kept the name. Some believe that it was Alexander the Great that originally named it Heliopolis. In the 4th century AD, the Roman ruler Constantine the Great converted the area into a Christian shrine. When the Muslims gained the area in 637 AD, they converted the Roman temples and Christian churches atop the huge platform into a Mohammedan enclave. Where Zeus and Jupiter had been worshipped, a mosque was built to worship Allah. The large, thick stone blocks are so tightly put together that no one to this very day has been able to penetrate the chambers, tunnels, caverns, and other substructures that lie hidden beneath it. Even today, there exists no crane, vehicle, or mechanism that can lift, let alone place with precision the 1,000 to 1,200 ton slabs that make up this immense platform. In terms of the quantity of stone cut, shaped, hauled, and embedded layer upon the site, it could possibly dwarf the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Following the deluge, to carry out their air operations, the Anunnaki had to establish new operations centers across the Middle East. Their chosen facility locations have played major roles in human history, all the way up to our present day. Here we describe in some detail the flight corridors and strategic locations for supporting aerospace infrastructure. Most any aircraft pilot will agree that while avionics instrumentation is extremely helpful, nothing beats a visual marker to determine a landing approach. Prior to the deluge, the Anunnaki chose Mount Ararat as a starting focal point for their landing corridor as they flew into and around the Sumer area. Following the deluge, things had to be rebuilt. Air operations were shifted west toward the Mediterranean Sea, but due to its easy recognition from the sky, Ararat remained a primary focal point. It is probably no coincidence, then, that Enki, knowing some level of surviving infrastructure would be there, directed Zeusudra, aka Noah, to dock his vessel at the foot of Mount Ararat.
As soon as possible following the deluge, the Anunnaki worked out an arrow-like landing corridor from Ararat to Baalbek. To create the triangular landing corridor required, Anunnaki surveyors extended that line all the way into Egypt. Then, using a compass with its focal point on Baalbek, the surveyor drew an arc through the highest peak with an unobstructed view on the Sinai Peninsula, Mount Shumar. Where the compass intersected the line from Baalbek to Egypt, The surveyor drew a circle over the point of intersection. This location is on the Earth's 30th parallel north latitude line. It was the location where the pyramids of Giza would be built to create the triangular landing corridor required to safely land an aircraft in the Cedar Mountains of Baalbek. The distance from Baalbek to Mount Shumar and the Great Pyramid of Giza are exactly the same. This, however, is only part of the amazing grid which the Anunnaki laid out in support of their post-deluge spaceport at Tillman on the Sinai Peninsula.
The enigmatic pyramids at Giza are marvels of sophistication and engineering prowess. These multifunction structures have been associated with energy production and other capabilities, but for our discussion here, we will focus on their aerospace support functions. For starters, the Great Pyramid with its height of 455 feet provided the third point of triangulation for the landing corridor to Baalbek. Light-reflecting limestone was used for its casing, providing a perfect play of light and shadow for clear orientation and direction from the sky. These shadows also serve as a sundial, indicating time of year and time of day. Air shafts in the king's chamber even unto this day regulate the inside temperature to a constant 68 degrees Fahrenheit no matter the outside weather, an ideal environment for weight and measurement instruments. This is also a good place to note that according to its measurements reported in biblical text, the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy of Holies, fits perfectly inside the sarcophagus found in the king's chamber.
The next measured line of the grid was drawn from Mount Shumar to Ararat. These mountains, by their sheer height and location, served as beacons for the riders of the clouds. The next line was drawn through the center of the Ararat landing corridor, just as it had been prior to the deluge, when the Anunnaki command center was located at Nippur. Nippur was Enlil's command post, the bond of heaven and earth. It secured the tablets of destinies, on which orbital and spaceflight information was stored. Using the same practice for this new Sinai spaceport, the center line would be drawn through a location where the city of Jerusalem was settled, a place hallowed to this day by Jewish, Christian, and Muslim alike.
Jerusalem had 3 mountain peaks. From north to south, they are Mount Zophim, Mount Moriah, and Mount Zion. Of these, Mount Moriah has been the most sacred. According to the book of Genesis, it was the mount to which the Lord directed Abraham with Isaac when Abraham's fidelity was tested. The large horizontal platform atop Mount Moriah is similar in layout to the one in Baalbek, but much smaller. It has been called the Temple Mount from times when it served as the site of the Jewish Temple of Jerusalem. It is currently occupied by the Muslim Dome of the Rock. According to the Quran, it was from the sacred rock that the Prophet Muhammad was taken by the angel Gabriel from Mecca to Jerusalem, with a stopover at Mount Sinai. Then he was taken heavenward via a ladder of light, where he met God and received divine instructions before being returned to the sacred rock via the same ladder of light. He returned to Mecca, again stopping over at Mount Sinai, on the angel's winged horse.
All indications are that Jerusalem was a divine command and communication center where, as in Baalbek, a stone that whispers or a stone of splendor was secreted away. And just as the old command center in Nippur prior to the deluge, the new command center at Jerusalem lies on a central line that bisected the landing corridor, focused on Ararat, and was outlined by the Giza pyramids and Mount Shumar. We also find that Egyptian Heliopolis, aka Giza, is precisely the same distance from Jerusalem as is Mount Shumar. The final line drawn on the grid was drawn along the line of Jerusalem where the spaceport would be located. It was marked at the intersection where the center line from Jerusalem intersected the 30th parallel north. The final beacon was established on Mount Sinai, in the center of the desert, where to this day there is a plateau surrounded by mountains.
The spaceport on Sinai sits on the Earth's 30th parallel north, just as does the Giza pyramids. Eridu, the first settled city upon Anunnaki arrival to Earth, was also located on the 30th parallel north. The sacred city of Harappa in the Indus Valley, as well as the Persian city, which the Greeks called Persepolis, city of Persians, were also located on the 30th parallel. No people lived in Persepolis. It was built only to celebrate the new year on the day of the spring equinox, when the king and his entourage would come there. Also located on the 30th parallel was the Buddhist city of Lhasa in Tibet. And gazing straight along the 30th parallel from Giza is the Sphinx, showing the way to the stairway to heaven, the spaceport, in the middle of the Sinai Peninsula. Is this all coincidence or design? And if design, what is the significance of this 30th north parallel of Earth's latitude?
The significance of the 30th parallel north goes back to when the Anunnaki decided to lower kingship to Earth following the deluge. According to Sumerian texts, when the Anunnaki decided to rebuild on Earth following the deluge, to help quell the intensifying feud between his sons, Enlil and Enki, Anu divided domain of the Earth between the brothers. To Enki and his offspring, the African lands were given. To Enlil and his offspring, the lands of the Semites and Indo-Europeans was given. It encompasses most of the northern hemisphere to include the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia. Within these areas, human civilizations were allotted 3 regions: first Sumer, then Egypt, and finally the Indus Valley. The 4th region was a sacred area exclusive to the Anunnaki, for use as their post-deluge spaceport. The 4th region was the Sinai Peninsula. It was the domain of Ninhursag, who did her best to keep the peace between her quarreling brothers. In addition to dividing the lands on Earth, the Earth's sky was divided into 3 ways. The way of Anu was between the north and south 30th parallels. The way of Enlil was the remaining northern portion, and the way of Enki was the remaining southern portion. The 30th parallel north served as a territorial demarcation. For all the reasons stated, it is highly reasonable to suggest that the spaceport was located where the 30th parallel north intersected the central line drawn from Jerusalem.
The Anunnaki aerospace prowess also extended to outer space. The first ever identification of stars, their locations in space, their grouped constellations, and names given to them appeared in Sumer, not in Greece as is widely accepted. The much later Egyptian zodiac representations were almost identical to the Sumerian ones. It takes the Earth 2,160 years to travel through all of the zodiac houses. Yet, the Sumerians mapped these constellations and documented them in their astronomical tablets. One has to seriously ponder how they knew that. Their answer, of course, is we learned it from the Anunnaki.
Central to this astronomical knowledge, and consequently also to all the religions, beliefs, events, and depictions of the ancient world, was the conviction that there is one more planet in our solar system, the one the Sumerians called Nibiru, the Babylonians called Marduk, and the Egyptians called the imperishable star, the celestial abode of the gods. Held in homage throughout Egypt, Mesopotamia, and elsewhere, its ubiquitous emblem was that of the winged globe.
Sumerian tablets, cylinder seals, and pictographs provide significant insight to our civilization's history and evolution, should we not summarily reject them as myth or legend. In 1928, a farmer accidentally uncovered ruins that turned out to be the ancient city of Ugarit. The finds included a temple to the Canaanite god Baal, the Lord, and scores of clay tablets. At the head of the Canaanite pantheon was a supreme deity, El. El was a generic Hebrew term for deity, stemming from the Akkadian word Elu, which meant lofty one. But in Canaanite tales, El was the personal name of a deity who was the final authority in all divine or human affairs. He was the father of the gods as well as the father of men.
El had many offspring, but his principal children were 3 sons and a daughter. They were the gods Yam, of the ocean or sea, Baal, Lord, Moat, Smiter, Annihilator, and the goddess Anat, she who responded. In names and relationships, they clearly paralleled the Greek gods Poseidon, god of the seas, Zeus, lord of the gods, and Hades, god of the lower world. Baal, like Zeus, was always armed with a lightning missile, and his cult symbol was the bull. In Greek tales, when Zeus fought Typhon, it was his sister Athena, goddess of love and war, who alone stood by him. In Egyptian tales, Isis alone stood by her brother husband, Osiris. So it was that when Baal fought his two brothers, it was Anat, his sister lover, who alone came to his aid. Like Athena, she was on one hand the maiden, often flaunting her naked beauty, and on the other hand, the goddess of war. The lion was her symbol of bravery. In the Old Testament, she is called Ashtoreth.
The links to Egyptian lore are as obvious as those to Greek lore. In Egyptian lore, Osiris was resurrected by Isis after she found his remains at the Canaanite city of Byblos. Likewise, Baal was brought back to life by Anat after he was smitten by Mot. Egyptian monuments of the New Kingdom often depicted the Canaanite gods as Egyptian deities, calling them Min, Resheph, Kadesh, and Anthat. We find the same tales applying to the same gods, but under different names throughout the ancient world, to include teachings which fill the Old Testament, and they all began with the Anunnaki astronauts of Sumer.
Okay, the source for this episode is Zecharia Sitchin's Stairway to Heaven. With this one, we've stepped into Egypt, and we'll go further into Egypt in our next episode, where this ongoing feud between Enlil and his clan and Enki and his clan leads to full-on wars. Back to this journey of discovering who we are. I want to suggest hearing what near-death experiencers have to say about our reality. It's a good place to start. I've listened to hundreds. Their reports and my understanding of quantum physics has immensely expanded my perception of reality and where I fit into it. And that is power. That power is waiting for all of us. Love is the fundamental force of creation. Keep a smile in your heart and spread it as far and as wide as you can. It is much needed. I appreciate you guys. The light in me honors the light in you. Be safe out there. And go birds. Namaste.